Today we're going to talk about Francis Bacon and Charles Darwin. So this is kind of our science section. Again, we're still talking about human nature and what humans are capable of. Francis Bacon is credited with the idea that people need to pay attention to their observations. They need to be aware of what they're seeing in order to make science conclusions. Okay. Now remember, he was writing in the late 1500s, early 1600s. So his ideas are really old, right? We're still reading them. Again, the idea that we need to pay attention to what we're seeing, that's kind of a revolutionary idea of the time. Charles Darwin is often credited for inventing evolution. However, he did not invent evolution. Charles Darwin did present a theory on the evolution of species, okay, on the changes that occur over millions of years to a species, okay? But both Francis Bacon and Charles Darwin focus on the power of the person to make observations about the world around them. So let's start with Francis Bacon. Francis Bacon is often credited for inventing the scientific method. And again, this is not true. Francis Bacon is known for helping us understand that people need to pay attention to their observations. They need to list and organize and collect information. But Francis Bacon failed to realize the concept of the hypothesis. All right, a scientist needs to have a hypothesis and then gather information. So I want to reiterate that. Francis Bacon helps us understand the idea of observation, but he did not invent the scientific method, okay? Let's talk about point number 1. Francis Bacon talks about the 4 classes of idols and false notions, and they interfere with the human's mind's ability to perceive the truth. The best remedy is inductive reasoning. One should collect and list observations from nature, and after gathering and organizing, the truth will be apparent. So there are 4 categories of thinking and notions that prevent us from understanding and seeing the world as truth. Okay? These are the 4 areas of our brain that are preventing us from truly seeing. So point number 1, he says that we have these things called the idols of the tribe, and they are distortions arising from the limits of human perception and understanding. So there's only so much we can see and understand, and so that prevents us from fully seeing. There's also the idols of the cave, and they arise from individual idiosyncrasies and experience. So all of us bring something different to the table, right? You see pink probably a little bit differently than I see pink. I like to get up early in the morning and exercise first thing. Do you like to sleep in? Right? These are just idiosyncrasies, and they color our perspective of the world. Idols of the marketplace are caused by the imprecision of language. So sort of how we hear one another in different languages across the world, right? They change the way we see the world. Idols of the theater result from misleading philosophies and principles. So when we're a little bit off on our philosophies and principles, well, they kind of color our perspective of the world. So he's really trying to help us understand that observation is important to true scientific knowledge. Unfortunately, there are 4 areas inside of us that prevent us from really fully observing and collecting and listing from nature. Okay, so the idols limit our perception. They give us strangled thought. They color our observation and our imagination. These are all areas that prevent us from seeing the truth. Now, the brilliance of this essay of the 4 idols lies in Bacon's focus not on what is observed, but on the instrument of observation, the human mind. He is basically saying, hey, all of us have this capability inside of us. We have the human mind. We are capable of seeing the world. We just have to understand what is preventing us from seeing the truth. If we can acknowledge that, acknowledge what is causing us stress and problems, then we can move forward. And that's a really interesting idea, saying that, hey, humans, y'all need to pay attention to your flaws. That's It's kind of revolutionary. This quote is more at the beginning of the essay. It's in paragraph number 5. So let me read the quote. So the spirit of man, according as it is meted out to different individuals, as in a fact a thing variable and full of perturbation and governed as it were by change, end quote. This quote really talks about what's inside of a man. What is a man capable of? Who is he? Well, the spirit of man is in fact variable, constantly changing, and it's full of disruption and agitation and disquiet. And it's governed by change. So man is constantly full of change and disquiet and agitation, and it's always varying. That's an interesting idea, that human beings are not stagnant. Human beings are not just waiting around lazy. We're always changing, and we're constantly being agitated and bothered, and we're working in our world, right? We're paying attention to the world, and things around us are changing us. And that's an interesting idea. I want to reiterate that Charles Darwin did not invent the idea of evolution. Okay, the idea was around before Darwin. But Darwin is writing about evolution. He is writing about the continuation of species and the parts of species that get carried on. All right, but he did not invent evolution. What he should be noted for is this idea of asking questions, gathering evidence, and drawing conclusions, because that's what Darwin did. He got on a boat, went out into the Galapagos, and looked at species to find answers to his questions about the survival of species. And he came up with 3 reasons as to why there are varieties of species in nature. Right? There are 3 forces that cause variations. Number 1, natural selection. Variations occur spontaneously by chance, but then they are selected for their aids to survival. Now, this idea is often credited as survival of the fittest. But please note, survival of the fittest is not Darwin's terminology, okay? The idea is the same, but he didn't say the words survival of the fittest. He's saying that the part of the species that helps survival, that aids survival, will continue. You could argue, and so that is technically survival of the fittest, but those are not his words, okay? Now, the second force that causes variations, direct action from the environment. Species do not survive because of climate, food conditions, or the like. For example, if there is a volcano and it erupts and it kills off an entire species of bird, well, that's the end of the bird species, right? The environment does directly impact animals and humans. All right, number 3, the effects of use or disuse of a variation. So let's pretend that there's a frog in the Amazon that has 5 legs. Well, if that 5th leg is important to the animal, it aids his survival, it helps him catch more food, it helps him run away from predators faster, then that 5th leg will continue. If the 5th leg is never used, it will eventually, over thousands, millions of years, no longer be present in the species. When I think about that idea, I usually think about wisdom teeth. We don't need wisdom teeth as humans anymore, and people are starting to be born without them. I just think that's interesting, right? Over time, our bodies are realizing that we don't need the wisdom teeth, and so we're slowly evolving into no longer producing wisdom teeth. So I ask, how many of you have wisdom teeth? I was not born with any wisdom teeth, but my brothers were. I just think that's interesting. Let's get into a specific part of Darwin. This quote is Charles Darwin's definition of natural selection. So I'm going to read the quote. Quote, "We may feel sure that any variation in the least degree injurious would be rigidly destroyed. This preservation of favorable variations and the rejection of injurious variations I call natural selection, end quote. I like the beginning of this quote because he's saying, you know what? If there's any part of a species that is injurious, that is causing harm, it most likely will be rigidly destroyed. It will be eliminated. And this idea that species are constantly evolving to make themselves stronger and better. So if there is a part like a hair or an eye or a finger or skin tone or texture that is causing a problem, it will be destroyed because we're constantly trying to survive. And that's an interesting idea. All species are trying to survive, and we are going to eliminate all things that try to prevent us from survival. So we will take our favorable variations, things that we like, things that we need, things that are not harmful, and we will continue. So we are always trying to get better. I like that idea. All species are evolving and trying to improve. That's a really beautiful idea if you think about it.